Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Right, so now we're going to be going through self-evident truths. Now, over the next few hours and hopefully by tomorrow, you'll understand why this workshop is structured in this way. Because we haven't started using any arguments for God's existence yet. We haven't used any arguments yet, but I'm giving you the correct framework, the right stepping stones in order for you to walk on, in order to reach a certain destination. So this workshop has been specifically structured in this specific way in order for you to have the right foundations and the conceptual tools in order for you to understand how to articulate a compassionate and intelligent case for Islam to our brothers and sisters in humanity. So, I want to talk about self-evident truths. And let me start with a story. Everybody loves stories, okay? So, David calls me. And I see on my phone that David is calling. Who is David? David is my old school friend. He is my old school friend that I used to sit next to when I was 10 years old. And we grew up together, and he used to ask me really, really funny questions. Okay? And some of these funny questions were so funny and weird that, sometimes a bit of a headache sitting next to him. But we're old now, I'm 38 years old now, and haven't heard from him for a long time. So, although initially I was reluctant to pick up the phone, I decide to pick up the phone. David, how's it going? Oh, Hamza, I'm fine. It's been, how long has it been? Over 10 years, we haven't heard from each other. You know what? I have something really important to share with you. Can you have lunch with me tomorrow at noon? And I'm like, oh man, lunch. Yeah, sure, I'll see you tomorrow. Whereabouts? Okay, I'll see you there tomorrow at noon. So fast forward a few hours or a day, and I meet him in a restaurant. We had a great time. We had our entrees, our hors d'oeuvres. We had the main meal. No problem. Everything was fine. Nothing to be afraid of. People change, 10-year-olds don't remain 10-year-olds forever. However, when the dessert came, then he decided to start being very weird like he used to be when he was 10 years old. And he said to me, Hamza, I need to tell you something. And there's me just about to put some of the cheesecake in my mouth. I'm like, what? He's like, Hamza, do you know the past never existed? What happened 5 minutes ago? What happened 5 days ago? What happened 5 weeks ago? What happened 5 years ago? What happened 5 decades ago? What happened 5 millennia ago? Never, ever happened. This universe was created 5 minutes ago with all the memories that you have in your brain to give you the illusion that you've been around for a while. So, I'm going to continue the story with 2 endings. Ending number 1. I say, really, David? Oh my God, I need to prove to you why the past is actually real. I need to show to you that we have calendars, it makes sense of our memories, it makes sense of our psychological appreciation of the temporal depth and time. I need to show you some of my diaries and old pictures, just to prove to you the past was real. So that's the first ending. Second ending, alternative ending. Really, David? What evidence do you have to make such a claim? End of story. Which ending is more rational? Number 1 or number 2? Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Ending number 2 is the most rational. Limada? Why? Why? Why is it most rational?
Because the person making the claim needs to.
Absolutely! The person is making a claim and the onus of proof is on him. But it's not that simple. His claim is challenging a self-evident truth. Now, it doesn't mean self-evident truths are always going to be true. They may change in the future. That's not the point. But if you challenge a self-evident truth, the onus of proof is on you. Correct? So, where am I going with this? I'm going to try and show to you that the basic idea of a creator is self-evidently true. If it's self-evidently true, then when an atheist says, does God exist? You need to not always have to answer the question. You could just turn the tables and say, well, what evidence do you have to reject the idea? This is very Quranic. When Allah says, is there any doubt? He says that the Anbiya say, is there any doubt in the creator of the heavens and the earth? Give me one statement of a Nabi, of a prophet, in the Quran to show that the creator exists. One. Give me one direct statement. Give it to me. It's very hard to find, isn't it? Because the main message of the Anbiya was to awaken the fitr, to make them realize that Allah deserves worship. It was self-evidently true that there was a creator, some kind of cause for everything that exists. There's probably only 2 ayat only that indicate a direct argument for God's existence, something we're going to address maybe tomorrow, which is the Quranic argument for God's existence, chapter 52, verses 35 to 36. By the way, this doesn't mean there are no good arguments. There are good arguments. But it goes to show that we've been addressing this thing in the wrong way. We fall for the trap. They ask you a question and we fall for the trap. We need to turn the tables. What evidence do you have to deny this self-evident truth? So let me discuss this with you. So, a self-evident truth is a truth that is true by default. It's true by default. Now, it doesn't mean it may not change. It may change. We may have evidence accumulated, and in the future we may go against a self-evident truth. But if something is considered true by default, then when someone tries to challenge it, the onus of proof is on them. So, here are some examples of self-evident truth. The reality of the past. The very fact that we believe the past was once the present is a self-evident truth. We can't really prove it per se, but it's self-evidently true because it makes sense of our experiences, it makes sense of our timeline on Facebook, it makes sense of our memories, it makes sense of our psychological appreciation of the passing of time, it makes sense of our history books, it makes sense of science, it makes sense of so many different things. Can we prove it absolutely? No. It could be that the universe was created 5 minutes ago with all of these memories and all of these photographs and all of these X, Y, and Z, right? Absolutely. But it's true by default because it makes sense of all of these things. If someone challenges the idea that the past once didn't, that the past existed, then they have to shoulder the burden of proof. Another idea of a self-evident truth is that we have rational minds. That we can use our minds and we can acquire and find the truth. This is self-evidently true. Could it be that we don't have rational minds? Yes. And there are some philosophers who argue this. In the philosophy of psychology, you have some philosophers that say, we don't have rational minds. I remember we were discussing this. Because if we were evolved as a result of natural selection or the Darwinian mechanism, then it's not necessarily true that we have rational minds. Why would it be necessarily true? Because evolution doesn't give a damn about truth. Evolution only gives a damn about survival. And it could be that our survival was as a result of false beliefs and not true beliefs. For example, we could have been jungle people in the jungle, and we could have said, all fungi are poisonous. All fungi are poisonous. Is it true all fungi are poisonous? No. But having that false belief leads to survival. Do you see the point? It could be that, and that's why Darwin was in doubt. He wrote this in a letter to one of his friends. He was like, are there any convictions in a monkey's mind? If there are any convictions in such a mind, right? He was in doubt about truth itself and about the fact that we could even have convictions, because maybe it's just an illusion. Maybe what we think is true has come from false beliefs in the past, and we've evolved as a result of false beliefs. Anyway, don't get depressed about this. The point is, there are self-evident truths, like the reality of the past. The past was once the present. Like, for example, we have a rational mind and we can acquire truth. These are self-evidently true. They're true by default. If someone challenges them, the onus of proof is on them. Okay? Make sense? Good. So moving on. What's very interesting is that self-evident truths have some characteristics. Now, I don't want you to confuse this with criteria. Because if you need criteria for self-evident truth, then they don't become self-evident truth anymore. Right? They don't become self-evidently true. But these are features or characteristics of self-evident truths. Characteristic number one. The self-evident truth must be universal. What do we mean by universal? We do not mean that everyone has to agree. No. What we mean is that it's not the product of a specific social circumstance. So when we say this self-evident truth has to be universal, we're saying it is not the product of a specific social circumstance. I repeat, it is not the product of a specific social circumstance or reality. It doesn't mean that everyone has to agree. It doesn't mean that there must be a majority. It just means that it doesn't come from a specific social condition. For example, if only one village in Nigeria believed that the past was once real, then you couldn't consider it as universal. So it has to be universal. The next one, which is the most important one, is a characteristic of a self-evident truth, is that it is untaught. Untaught. What does this mean? This means you do not acquire this idea, you do not acquire this self-evident truth as a result of learning or as a result of external information transfer. Like, and external information transfer is like what I'm doing to you. I'm external to you, and I'm giving you some information and knowledge externally to yourself. A self-evident truth is not acquired or held as a result of external information transfer. Okay? The third one, and I'm going to put these together. They're both really the same. It has to be natural and intuitive. Natural means it's formed as a result of a functioning human mind and psyche. And intuitive is that it is the simplest and most comprehensive explanation. It is the simplest and most comprehensive explanation, meaning it doesn't create more questions than it answers, and it answers the question, or it is an adequate representation of the specific thing that you are referring to. So, in order for me to make sense of you, make sense of this is let's use now the past. So we can argue that the past was once the present. This is a self-evident truth. Okay? Let's now see how it fits with these characteristics. Of course it does. Is the past being once the present, the past being once real, is that universal? Yes or no?
Yes.
Why?
Everyone, everywhere, believes.
Basically, most people, it doesn't have to be everyone, but the idea that the past was once the present is not a result of a specific social condition. You have people coming up with this idea instantaneously and simultaneously, like the Chinese and the English and everybody else, right? Make sense? Good. Right. And it doesn't have to be a consensus. Is the idea of the past once being the present untaught? Is it untaught? How?
Experience.
Because you don't learn in school, in kindergarten, or in primary school and high school, your teachers don't say to you, Hamza, Aisha, Fatima, this the past was once real, right? You don't learn this. You don't learn the past was once real. You learn this via your own introspection. This is actually a source of knowledge. In Western epistemology, in philosophy, you have sources of knowledge. One of the sources of knowledge includes introspection. I repeat, it includes introspection. This is one of the sources of knowledge in Western epistemology. Okay? So, when we're saying a characteristic of a self-evident truth is untaught, we're saying there is no external information transfer. You acquire this self-evident truth via your own introspection. Good. Finally, the past once being the present, the past was once real. Is this natural and intuitive? Yes, because this self-evident truth is the product of a normal functioning human mind and psyche, and also believing and agreeing that the past was once the present, the past was once real, believing that is so that being self-evidently true makes sense because it's the most simple and comprehensive explanation of our reality. It's simple by virtue of it being simple that you're saying the past was real, and it's comprehensive, which means it doesn't create more questions than it answers. It answers most of the questions. For example, if we were to say that the past wasn't real, right, it's a simple explanation, but it's not comprehensive because you have so many questions you need to answer now. Well, how does that idea make sense of my past experiences? How does that idea make sense of human history? How does that idea make sense of my psychological appreciation of temporal depth, of time? How does that idea explain X, Y, and Z? Do you see the point here? It's not comprehensive, so you can't say it's an intuitive idea. It doesn't have an intuitive characteristic. So we've discussed what self-evident truths are. They don't have to be absolutely true, they may change, but they're true by default. If they're true by default, then the one who's challenging them, the onus of proof is on them. Self-evident truths do not have criteria, but they have characteristics. Some of these characteristics include universal, taught, natural, and intuitive, and we've applied this to one self-evident truth, which is the past once being real. Now, let's apply this to Allah, to God. Now, what do we mean by God here? We're not talking about, the being with these names and attributes, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Latif, Al-Qudus, Al-Hakim. We're not saying this as a self-evident truth, because it's not self-evidently true. That's why you need revelation, right? But the underlying concept, the underlying idea the conceptual common denominator, that there is a creator for things, that there is a creator of the heavens and the earth, there is a creator, a designer, an uncreated creator. This is a self-evident truth. And let's see if it fits the characteristics of self-evident truth. So, the basic idea of a creator, or there's a creator for things, or prior causal condition for things, that there requires prior causal conditions for things that exist and begin to exist, is that universal? Yes or no? Yes. I didn't say there has to be a consensus, but is it universal from the point of view that it's not just the product of one specific social condition? Correct? Are you awake? Good. So the idea of the underlying concept of a creator or prior causal conditions for things that begin to exist, that idea is universal because it's not the product of a specific social condition. Correct? Good. Now let's move on. Is this basic idea of prior causal conditions for things that begin to exist untaught? Is it untaught? Yes, because at school they don't teach you that things require causes. You don't understand this. This is as a result of your private personal experiences growing up and as a result of your introspection. Correct? Correct? Good. Is this idea natural and intuitive? Yes, because a natural mind comes up with the idea that things that begin to exist require causes. Is it intuitive? Does it explain things, and is it comprehensive? Yes, because if you said there is no prior causal condition for the universe, you're saying the universe comes from nothing, which creates far more problems than it solves. So we see the underlying basic concept of a creator, which is prior causal conditions for things that begin to exist, or some kind of creative activity, is a self-evident truth. If it's a self-evident truth, then the onus of proof is on who? The one who is rejecting the creator. And that's why Allah is Al-Haq. He is the truth. And as we said in the first session this morning, that we have a fitrah, an innate natural disposition that has a form of primary or proto-knowledge. And that knowledge includes that Allah exists and He deserves worship. And the supporting cognitive studies, you should really do this research. It's very fascinating. There are many cognitive studies that can allude to, because studies change all the time, I wouldn't use them as absolute evidence, but there's a lot of cognitive studies that show that we have an affinity for design, an affinity to apply causes to things, and it's very, very interesting. This particular study was done by Deborah Kellerman and others. So, any questions? Remember, this is not an argument. We haven't started the arguments for God's existence yet, right? But I've given you the necessary foundation so far. We talked about first principles. We talked about the first principles and assumptions. We talked about the fitrah. Now we're talking about the onus of proof, self-evident truths, the nature of self-evident truths, right? So it gives us a sense of confidence in how to turn the tables. And not only that, it gives you the right concepts and ideas that you can start discussing with people, that there are self-evident truths that if they're challenged, then the onus of proof is on them. So any questions? Yes, sir. Sorry?
You mentioned that it is not mentioned anywhere in Quran about that. What that's about. So what is about Ayatul Kursi? And then there is also in Surah Rahman when Allah is saying فَبِيَكِ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Same thing in Surah Al-Shura. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. Then Surah Al-Ikhlas. What is?
Well, how is that a proof for God's existence?
giving the full definition.
But definitions are not proofs.
Because he's mentioning all the in Surah Rahman things and then he's saying,
yeah, Allah is saying about His wonders. He didn't say, and therefore don't deny that I created the universe. Allah says, and which of the wonders, the best translation is wonders, not blessings. Because Allah says about Jahannam is a wonder as well, right? No one's going to say that Jahannam is a blessing, right? So which of the wonders are you going to deny? Allah's not saying this is a direct evidence for my existence. It's implied, I agree, but it's assumed. And there are some, I told you, I specifically said there are verses that articulate an argument for God's existence. But the majority of the Quran doesn't address that question. The majority of the Quran addresses one fundamental question in summary, in general, which is, who deserves worship? So when Allah says, look at the universe, look at the camel, how we created it, look at the natural phenomena, Allah is pointing not to the fact that He exists because His rububiyyah, His creative power is assumed. He's saying, well, since He created that, it follows He deserves worship. That's the Quranic narrative. And that's how we must allow the Quran to speak for itself. We bring to the Quran. That's wrong. The Quran should bring to us. And therefore, when we look, and this is classical tafsir, right? When the ulama looked at the Quran, they see that there is a strategy. The strategy is that it attacks the fitrah of the human being to uncloud the fitrah, to awaken the truth within. And the way it does it by giving these ayat on the creative universe. So Allah is giving these ayat with the assumption that He already created it, with the assumption that there is a power and wisdom behind this. Therefore, Allah deserves worship. That's the point. So when you look at Surah An-Naba, for example, you just see all the premises being laid out. Allah is saying, and you see the creation and the mountains with pegs and all of this stuff, and then Allah concludes usually, and therefore worship Him, and therefore know that your Lord is one that deserves worship. You have one ilah, you have one deity. And that's the strategy of the Quran. It moves you from rububiyyah to al-ibadah, from acknowledging the creative power of God to concluding that He deserves worship. So appreciating the creative power of God and then concluding He deserves worship. So then if there was any question that was raised by the Quran, that question would be, who deserves worship? Not God exists. Because Allah says in the Quran, if you ask the Quraysh, if you ask the Arabs who created the heavens and the earth, this is an ayah in the Quran. If you ask the Arabs who created the heavens and the earth, they would say it is Allah. They already knew. Allah is talking to them. Can you do tadabbur and use these ayat to show that there's a creator? Yes, I'm not denying that. But that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose for these verses is to create an awakening within you that if you appreciate the creative power of Allah, then He solely deserves worship. That's the point. Does that make sense? Why not?
Blaming and he's addressing, saying clearly,
Yeah? Yeah, but is Allah using that as a proof for His existence? There's no proof there. Allah is saying He is the creator. He's not proving His existence. He's announcing Himself. There's a fundamental difference here, right? Like, for example, I am a human being. Is that proof for my humanness? I could be artificial intelligence and you don't know, alright? So Allah is announcing to make us realize what we already know. There is a creator with power, with wisdom. If that's the case, He deserves worship. That's the point, my brother, yeah? Yes, sir.
Yeah, the point that the brother discussed, in the Quran, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he says that, I looked at the moon, then I looked at the sun, it's bigger, but they disappear. So my Lord is the Lord who is the creator of all of these things, not the sun, not the moon.
Yeah, but those verses have nothing to do with proving God's existence. Those verses are to do with the fact that who deserves worship. That Ibrahim, and that's why, wallahi, my dear brothers and sisters, right? We must allow the Quran to speak for itself. Because those ayat have been so abused and misused. They've been abused to the level that we think Ibrahim alayhi salam had doubt. If you look at the tafsir, it was a rhetorical argument. Many of us think that Ibrahim alayhi salam was in doubt about something. And this is like almost an insult and a slander to Ibrahim alayhi salam. But that's what we learn because we're not in touch with the book of Allah properly. Those verses have nothing to do with Ibrahim alayhi salam's doubt. They were a rhetorical ploy used in a rational argument to show Allah deserves worship, not the fact that He exists. Because the argument assumes, shall I worship the moon or shall I worship the sun? No, I'm going to worship the creator of all of those. So it's not a proof for the creator per se, but it's implied. I agree, it's implied. But the main purpose of these verses is to show Allah deserves worship.
And another point, like you were mentioning about, who has to prove whom, as a matter of test, the time matter.
Yep.
Right? Somebody says that there was nothing 10 minutes from now, so we can just test it out. Wait, take a clock, and test 10 minutes. The 10 minutes passed, so we can test things out, right?
No, you can't test that out because the argument is that from the moment I spoke to you, the universe started 10 minutes ago. You could start a clock at that moment, but it doesn't affect my argument. I can say to you, 10 minutes ago, the universe began with all of these memories in your head, with all of the pictures and everything and all that stuff. Putting a clock now makes no difference to the argument. You see? You can't test it.
Another point in my mind.
And there's actually theories of time, Uncle. It's called the B theory of time. The B theory of time has no past, has no future, and has no present. It's tenseless. So 2080 is happening as we speak, and 1643 is happening as we speak. This is called the B theory of time, which is a theory of time that many physicists adopt. Would you believe it? Very unintuitive. But yeah, so the point I'm trying to say is, don't worry about these specific examples. Worry about the concepts I'm trying to show you. And the concept is, there could be someone who argues against a self-evident truth that seems to be true by default. It could change, but at the moment it's true by default. If someone argues against something that's true by default, then the onus of proof is on them. That's the main point we're trying to articulate, okay? Yes, sir?
The onus of argument is on them, I understand that. But in case of Dawah, because I'm trying to, if I don't give the Dawah, he would stay the way he is.
How do you know? How do you know? Why do you assume that?
Because who's taking the message? Because I'm trying to give him the message.
Yeah, and the message should be, God's existence is self-evidently true. Prove to me He doesn't exist. That could be your message. Why not?
Okay.
Do you see? I'm not saying don't give him dawah. But by the way, I'm not saying this is necessarily an argument. It's just an approach for you so you get the right strength and you have the right foundations. Because we spent the morning ensuring that we have the right foundations from the point of view of first principles and fitrah, from the point of view of understanding self-evident truths, and who has the onus of proof. After this, we're going to start articulating positive arguments. But those positive arguments will only make sense if you have the right foundations, which we've been discussing so far.
What you might say that you are telling God exists, so it's upon you to prove God. That's what I was trying to say.
No, why?
Because
I'm
taking the dawah to him, so I'm telling God exists. So he says it's upon you to prove God exists. Why do you have to prove that God exists?
No, that's why your dawah is wrong. Why would your dawah ever start that God exists? That's the whole point. You don't have to do that. You should say to people, you have a God that deserves worship. Now, if he says, well, I don't believe in God, say, okay, fine, well, why? Prove to me why God doesn't exist. terms of atheists. You see?
So,
Yes, sir.
if someone provides proof against a self-evident truth, take the example like in the Matrix, it's a self-evident truth that other people exist.
Yes.
But then Morpheus takes him and shows that actually it's all happening in their brains and other
Yes.
people don't exist.
Yes.
It's obviously not true, but does it remain a self-evident principle?
No, because I said self-evident truths are true by default. They may change. But if they change, it has to be challenged by someone. It's not the other way around. You're not proving self-evident truths. You challenge self-evident truths. If you do, you need to provide evidence for that challenge. And then once, if your challenge is adequate, then it's not a self-evident truth anymore. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
So, Rolando, what if somebody claims a different self-evident truth? For example, claims that, for example, atheism is universal, untaught, intuitive, and natural.
Yeah, well, let's apply it. Is it?
But I'm saying he would claim that.
Yeah, well, people claim many things. People claim that they're like a dinosaur. Yes, there's some people who think that they're alien and they actually paint their skin green. Remember, don't worry about claims. If you had to do your dawah based on people's claims and define yourself based on people's claims, you would be fundamentally schizophrenic. Don't worry about claims as a default position, right? As long as you get your stuff sorted, the foundational concepts, claims become irrelevant after that. But I do appreciate, it's a very good question. Someone can say, atheism is a self-evident truth because it seems to be universal. It's not the product of one specific social condition. Agreed. They also would say, well, it seems to be untaught, right? That I do disagree with because the concept of causality, the concept of prior causal conditions is not made up. Do you see? It's if we're introspection. If atheism were to be untaught, it would mean that we get taught that causality is real. We don't get taught causality is real. It's within us naturally. Yeah. So atheism fails from the second characteristic, and atheism fails from the last characteristic, which is that it's simple and comprehensive. Because atheism, by necessity, basically says no creator, universe came from nothing, essentially. All right. Is that simple? Yes. Is it comprehensive? No. Raises so many problems. How can being come from non-being, for example? So when we look at these characteristics, we say, well, obviously, atheism is not a self-evident truth. Okay?